This story begins with a girl named Biol who was all decked up in her school uniform and heading off to school, bubbling with excitement. She was so thrilled that her enthusiasm was palpable. Just as she was about to leave, her mom stopped her, scolding her for not wearing her shoes properly. Biol didn't listen to her and dashed out of the house with a smile as wide as a crescent moon. But fate had other plans. The poor girl, brimming with happiness, stepped outside and she was hit by a vehicle, and she died instantly. At the time of the accident, Buell was blissfully lost in her world, listening to her favorite idol and singer Wu Ju through her earphones. Clutched tightly in her hand was a concert ticket to Wu Ju's event, which was supposed to happen that very day. It was her first ever concert, and she couldn't have been happier. But life, or rather, death, had other plans. As she took her last breath, the only face she could see in her mind was Wu Ju's. Fast forward a few years, there is a creepy house that everyone avoids like the plague, because rumor has it that the place is haunted. But the one who is loving here was Biol. She suddenly wakes up and she's not just your average ghost. Turns out, Biol became a Grim Reaper after her death for some mysterious reason. And her job was to escort souls from the living world to the afterlife. When she wakes up, Biol is glued to her TV, which is showing a program about how souls can interact with objects in the living world if they focus really hard. Inspired, Biol decides to try her hand at touching her piano. At first, she fails miserably, but after a few attempts, she manages to touch it and she is thrilled. Looking around her house, it's obvious she's still Wu Ju's #1 fan, with his posters and memorabilia everywhere. But duty calls, and it's time for her job. She opens her wardrobe, which contains exactly 2 outfits: her old school uniform and her Grim Reaper uniform. She gets ready, complete with her signature makeup, grabs her cap, and hops on her bicycle to head to work. And let's not forget her loyal dog, who follows her everywhere since no one else can see Biol. She tells him to stay put. On her way, Biol spots a Wu Ju poster, and her heart skips a beat. Wu Ju is the only thing she remembers from her past life. Her identity, her home, and even how she became a Grim Reaper are all a blur. She only knows one thing: her job is to transport souls. Her assignment for the day comes when she sees an ambulance rushing by. Inside is a little girl, counting her final breaths. Biol heads to the hospital, the hotspot for Grim Reapers, because most souls make their exit from there. She arrives to find many other Grim Reapers already there, waiting for their assignments. After all, the hospital is like their workplace cafeteria where souls are plentiful. And so begins Buell's journey as a Grim Reaper. Is she caught between her love for Wu Ju and her rather peculiar afterlife job? When Biol sees the little girl on the brink of death, her heart sinks. She feels terrible watching such a young life fade away, and seeing the girl's mother sobbing only makes it worse. Outside the hospital room, all the Grim Reapers get visibly nervous when they see Dr. Sori. She's famous for pulling off impossible rescues and saving lives in the duress situations. Naturally, all the Reapers panic and start convincing their assigned souls to move on to the afterlife quickly. Fearing that Sori might snatch another soul away from them. Some Grim Reapers have a different agenda, as they don't want to go to the afterlife at all because they prefer wandering in the living world. To achieve this, they need to collect points. The more souls they send to the afterlife, the more points they earn, eventually leading to promotions. But Sori's presence ruins their plans, and they don't like her one bit. And on top of that, she has shown up today on her day off. So Grim Reapers scatter, dragging their souls along. Inside, Sori begins chest compressions on the little girl. After a few moments, the girl's breathing stops and she starts seeing Buell. The child stares at Buell and even reaches for her hand, but Buell hesitates. She knows she's not ready to take such a small child with her. So she lets go of the girl's hand, and miraculously, the girl's vitals improve. Everyone believes Sori has worked her magic again and saved yet another life. But Buell's actions don't go unnoticed. Her senior, Jo Yum-ki, sees everything. Realizing she's broken the Grim Reaper rules again, Buell rushes to the washroom, plunges her face into cold water, and berates herself. She hates the idea of taking someone's life and can't bring herself to follow the rules. Meanwhile, Sori steps outside to relax after her intense work. She's completely drained but tries to enjoy a moment of peace. Her friend Hyen Soo approaches her, noticing her smeared makeup and ruined lipstick. With a kind smile, he hands her his handkerchief and tells her to take care of herself before leaving. It's clear he has feelings for her, but Sori is too tired to read into it. Later, Sori heads to the washroom to fix herself up. When she looks in the mirror, she laughs, realizing she looks like a complete clown. As she starts washing her face, the tap suddenly turns off on its own. That's Buell's doing, of course. Because Biol had been watching Sori and was annoyed, suspecting that Sori had been spending time with a guy during work hours. Seeing Sori's messy makeup only fuels Buell's irritation, but when Biol looks at her own reflection in the mirror, or rather the lack of it, she grows sadder. She can't even see herself anymore. On the other hand, Woo-ju is preparing for his next concert, but his face betrays his emotions. He looks utterly depressed, as if he's forcing himself to go through the motions. Despite his misery, he puts on a brave face, steps onto the stage, and begins to sing while playing the piano. The audience goes wild, cheering for him with all their might, but behind his performance, Woo-ju's heart is clearly elsewhere. Woo-ju's concert is being broadcast live on TV, and during lunch at the hospital, all the Grim Reapers are glued to the screen, listening to his soulful performance. Bile slyly turns up the volume, causing everyone to exchange knowing smiles. They can't help but marvel at how Bile remains Woo-ju's biggest fan, even after death. But the mood takes a sharp turn when their senior Young Ki drops a bombshell. He casually announces that Woo-ju's time on Earth is running out. Bile freezes, her heart sinking. Seeing her reaction, Young Ki adds more salt to the wound, saying that Woo-ju only has 1 year left before he transitions to the afterlife. He even tries to lighten the mood by joking that Woo-ju will become even more famous in the afterlife, where celebrities like Michael Jackson and others are already waiting to welcome him. He'll get VIP treatment there too. The room falls silent, and all the Grim Reapers are left in shock, except for Young Ki, who seems more focused on his career goals. He smugly explains that escorting a mega celebrity like Woo-ju to the afterlife will earn him a ton of points, pushing him closer to his next promotion. To emphasize his efficiency, he shows off his soul tracking device, which allows him to locate souls with ease. Young Ki is like the model employee of the Grim Reaper world, always following rules to the letter, and naturally, everyone listens to him with admiration. But Biwal is devastated. The thought of losing her favorite idol is unbearable, and her distress causes her to get distracted. In her distraction, she accidentally spills gravy all over the group's carefully plated crispy meals. The other Grim Reapers shoot her angry glares, their appetites clearly ruined. Sensing the tension, Young Ki decides to redirect Bile's energy and assigns her a task to catch a soul that has run away from its own funeral. Bile reluctantly heads out and finds the rebellious soul, trying to convince him to come with her. But the soul, clearly in denial, refuses to believe he's actually dead. He angrily vents his frustration, telling Bile how he spent his entire life working hard and saving up a fortune, only to die just when it was finally time to enjoy it. I've barely begun to spend it, and you want me to leave now? No way, he declares stubbornly. He adamantly refuses to move on to the afterlife, which leaves Bile stuck in yet another awkward situation. Despite all of Buell's efforts, the old man stubbornly refuses to go to the afterlife, and even denies believing that Bile is a Grim Reaper. But the moment Young Ki shows up in his fancy car to collect the runaway soul, the old man's courage vanishes. Terrified, he meekly follows Young Ki, leaving Buell relieved, and finally she is now free to chase after her favorite idol, Woo-ju. Outside Woo-ju's studio, a massive line of fangirls is eagerly waiting for a glimpse of him. When Bile arrives, she spots her friend Dakshi. She is also a die-hard Woo-ju fan, waiting for him too. Interestingly, Dakshi is one of the souls Bile was supposed to escort to the afterlife, but she secretly broke the rules and allowed Dakshi to stay in the living world so she could continue being a loyal fan of Woo-ju. However, when Dakshi learns that Woo-ju only has a year left, she's heartbroken too. She shares with Bile that Woo-ju's latest album is deeply depressing and has been heavily criticized. Hearing this, Buell feels even worse for her star, unable to bear the thought of his struggles. Just then, Woo-ju emerges from the building, surrounded by security, and fans swarm him, trying to get closer. Dakshi makes an impulsive attempt to sneak into Woo-ju's van, but Buell quickly grabs her by the hair and pulls her back. "We're fans, not stalkers," she scolds. She reminds Dakshi that while they have the power to be with Woo-ju all the time, it's unethical to misuse it. Instead, they decide to act like normal fans and join the crowd chasing after Woo-ju's van. Inside the van, Woo-ju sits quietly and he is visibly upset. His manager, however, doesn't hold back and criticizes him harshly for making such a gloomy album instead of a romantic one, which is why people are rejecting it. Woo-ju, now fed up, interrupts the manager mid-rant and orders the car to stop. He steps out, ignoring his manager's protests, and walks to a nearby bus stop. The bus stop. A high school girl is sitting with her earphones on, listening to Woo-ju's depressing song. As if that wasn't enough, she's also furiously typing out a scathing comment about how terrible the song is. Woo-ju, curious and slightly offended, peeks at her phone screen to read the comment. When the girl notices someone looming over her, she removes her earphones and asks, "Who are you? And what are you doing?" Woo-ju takes off his mask, looks her straight in the eye, and says, "I'm the one you've been trash talking about." The girl's jaw drops in shock. Flustered, she stammers that she didn't know Woo-ju was this handsome in real life. She quickly adds, "Don't worry, I'll delete the comment right away. Woo-ju forces the girl to post the negative comment, adding, now that I've seen your face, I'll file a case against you, leaving her terrified. Woo-ju calmly boards a bus and vanishes from the scene. Byul and Dakshi are having a good time together when Byul gets a call from manager Go. He is furious and demands to know why Byul saved the little girl's life earlier. He reminds her that it's not her job to interfere with life and death. Sternly warns her that if she keeps breaking the rules and doesn't start transporting souls, she'll be sent to the afterlife herself. He questions why she even chose this role if she doesn't want to do her job. Manager Go gives Byul an ultimatum that if she sends the soul standing next to her, Dakshi, to the afterlife, she can keep her position. Otherwise, she'll be dismissed. Shocked, Byul ends the call and turns to Dakshi, who overheard everything, and Byul asks her if she wants to live here. Dakshi, hurt and angry, accuses Byul of betraying her. I thought you were my best friend, she snaps, but you want to send me to the afterlife. She storms off, yelling, if you send me away, you'll have no one left to talk to. I'm not leaving this world until I find my true love. Byul tries to stop her, but Dakshi doesn't look back. Woo-ju is wandering the streets, lost and frustrated. He calls his assistant, asking him to track his location and pick him up. After ending the call, he keeps walking and suddenly hears an old melody, one of his earlier compositions, coming from a rundown house. Intrigued, he approaches the house, drawn by the nostalgic tune. Inside, Byul is playing the piano, unaware of Woo-ju's presence. It's the same song she was listening to at the moment of her death, making it deeply significant to her. When Woo-ju hears it, he feels an overwhelming sense of comfort and sorrow. Curious, he steps inside and is surprised to find the place filled with memorabilia of himself, his photos, posters, and items all linked to him. As he explores the room, he spots the piano and sits down to play the same song. Byul, stunned to see her idol so up close, and she freezes, watching him play. She notices tears streaming down his face as he confesses, I don't want to stay in this world anymore. Nothing feels right, and soon I'll leave it all behind and all on my own terms. Byul is left speechless, unable to comprehend why her beloved idol is so consumed by despair. As Woo-ju continues to cry, she instinctively reaches out to wipe his tears. For the first time, Woo-ju feels someone's touch and his eyes widen in terror. Realizing something is wrong, he looks around the room but sees no one. Panicked, he runs out of the house, leaving Byul in utter shock. Woo-ju, convinced that the house was haunted, ran out in a panic. Outside, he spotted Byul's cute little puppy and thought, that ghost must have trapped this puppy here too. I'll rescue it soon. With that, he dashed away, leaving the poor puppy oblivious to his grand rescue plans. Byul also ran out of the house, disturbed and lost in thought. She couldn't shake off the fact that Woo-ju was seriously considering ending his life. Later, she and Dakshi went to a cafe, where Byul was so distracted that she couldn't even book concert tickets for Woo-ju's upcoming performance. Dakshi ended up booking the tickets herself. Dakshi asked Byul why she looked so troubled. Byul, unable to hold it in any longer, revealed the truth. Their idol was planning to end his life. She confessed she couldn't understand why he would make such a decision. Dakshi, equally shocked, suggested they find out the reason behind Woo-ju's thoughts, and for that they have to keep a 24/7 watch on him. Byul hesitated, reminding her that Woo-ju hated stalker fans. But the next day, they both set out on their mission. Byul explained that Woo-ju was incredibly disciplined, and he always wakes up on time and never skips his morning jog. She followed him on her cycle, smiling as she watched her idol jog with dedication. She proudly noted that he hadn't missed a single jog since becoming an idol. At home, they sneaked a peek into Woo-ju's fridge, which contained nothing but fresh fruits and vegetables. No junk food, no indulgences. Even chocolates sent by his fans ended up in the trash. Woo-ju made himself a juice out of raw vegetables, drinking it with ease, while Byul and Dakshi grimaced in horror. How can anyone drink that stuff? Despite their disgust, Byul felt reassured. At least he takes good care of his health, she thought with a smile. Later, Woo-ju headed to his studio, where he saw his assistant eating noodles. Immediately, he forbade the assistant from eating such food, stating that it was against his studio rules to have anything tempting, as it might make him crave it too. The assistant stopped eating and asked if Woo-ju was seriously planning to sue those high school girls who had criticized him. Dakshi, with mischief in her eyes, started walking toward the bathroom, but Byul quickly grabbed her and stopped her in her tracks. Dakshi tried to tempt Byul, saying, what if he slips on the soap? Someone should be there to help him. But Byul, though struggling to control herself, firmly replied, we can't do that. We have rules, and we're not breaking them. Later, they noticed Woo-ju had fallen asleep in his chair at the studio. Concerned, Byul wondered aloud if Woo-ju might be using drugs, which could explain his deteriorating mental state. Bile decided to check for any syringe marks on his hands, but there were none. This left them even more puzzled. What could be troubling him so deeply? Bile thought as she was now determined to find the answer. After some time, Wu Ju, who was getting ready for his song recording that he had to do with another singer, kept asking the background music team to play the instruments repeatedly. He seemed to be intentionally bothering them. As soon as the lead singer started singing, Wu Ju interrupted and told everyone that he didn't want to record the song today because he wasn't in the mood. Saying this, he began to leave. The lead singer, whose name was Jolene, affectionately suggested that Wu Ju go on a date with her. However, as usual, Wu Ju gave her a cold reply and refused before leaving. When Wu Ju returned to his room, his manager started yelling at him again. He questioned why he was behaving this way. The manager insisted that he should have at least recorded something, but Wu Ju simply repeated that he wasn't in the mood. The manager then expressed how rude Wu Ju had become, saying that he didn't even praise the artists working with him and was speaking rudely to them. Without responding, Wu Ju walked away. After he left, the manager became even angrier. Bile commented that perhaps the manager had overworked Wu Ju, which is why he had become so irritable. Then Jolene also came and she began complaining about Wu Ju. Gakshi told Jolene that she pretends to act all nice in front of Wu Ju, but speaks badly about him behind his back. Bile tried to take Gakshi away. Bile and Gakshi continued spying on Wu Ju. Gakshi seemed to enjoy snooping around Wu Ju's bedroom and on his bed. Wu Ju was talking to Dr. Sori while coming down the stairs. Dr. Sori was Wu Ju's personal doctor. When Bile and Gakshi found out that Wu Ju was talking to a woman, they quickly rushed to eavesdrop. Dr. Sori was advising Wu Ju to stop taking sleeping pills and suggested that he get a pet instead, which could help him. She warned that the sleeping pills were very harmful to him. However, Wu Ju replied that he wouldn't do that. Dr. Sori jokingly asked how he managed to live alone in such a big house and teased that there must be ghosts living with him. After cutting the call, Wu Ju took the sleeping pills in his hand and consumed them. Sitting near him were the two ghosts who actually lived with him. Wu Ju then placed the bottle on the table. Both ghost girls hovered near Wu Ju. Amid this, when Wu Ju went to sleep, Bile accidentally knocked over a bottle, causing it to fall. Startled, Wu Ju got extremely scared, clutched his bunny toy tightly and went to bed. Even on his bed, the ghosts didn't leave him alone and started discussing how their star had to endure daily struggles. Wu Ju turned toward Bile in his sleep, looking visibly frightened, and began having bad dreams. Bile gently massaged his forehead at a specific point, which calmed him down and made him sleep like a baby. Bile also fell asleep in her room, which was decorated entirely with Wu Ju's photos, from the pillow covers to the blankets. As she reflected, she felt deeply saddened, realizing that Wu Ju hadn't smiled even once the entire day and was clearly going through so much hardship. The next morning, Wu Ju woke up late, and Bile waited for him on the jogging track, as Wu Ju hadn't shown up for his usual morning jog. Concerned, she called Gakshi to tell her about it. At the cafe, Wu Ju's assistant and makeup artist went to fetch the food Wu Ju had ordered. To their surprise, they found him sitting in his vanity van, enjoying various junk foods, including cup noodles, which he hadn't eaten in ages. Wu Ju seemed to relish every bite and even told his assistant not to sue anyone who was bothering him. Instead, he suggested they only do volunteer work. Everyone, including Bile, was shocked by this sudden change in his behavior. When Wu Ju thanked his assistant for the food, Bile was stunned and the assistant was left so speechless that he started crying. He mentioned that in the 7 years he had worked for Wu Ju, he had never heard him say thank you or sorry. The assistant joked that Wu Ju was behaving like someone who was about to leave forever. Wu Ju merely smiled, but Bile grew even more worried and she solved the puzzle as to what might be going on. She suspected Wu Ju was planning something drastic. Just then, the manager called Bile and asked her why she was neglecting her own duties to follow Wu Ju around. He warned her that she was risking everything, her work and even her existence. Bile firmly pleaded with the manager not to interfere with Wu Ju. She admitted that if anything happened to Wu Ju, she wouldn't be able to live either. The manager reminded her that she wasn't alive in the first place. Bile confessed that while it was true she wasn't alive, seeing Wu Ju eat, laugh, and live gave her a sense of joy. She explained that she couldn't remember anything from her life after death, except for Wu Ju, who felt familiar and close to her. She insisted that the manager couldn't take him away from her. The manager, however, warned her one last time to stop meddling. As Bile left his office, other Grim Reapers stared at her disapprovingly, questioning why she was wasting her and others' time. That night, back home, Bile looked at her diary, where she had written 7 wishes she wanted to fulfill as a human. Sadly, she had never gotten the chance to achieve them. Wu Ju's assistant called him and urged him to speak to the manager, but Wu Ju hung up before the conversation could continue. The manager was growing increasingly worried, unable to figure out what Wu Ju truly wanted. Meanwhile, the restaurant owner stepped outside and asked the manager if Wu Ju would come. When he learned that Wu Ju wasn't coming, the owner seemed a bit sad. As he walked away, he noticed one of his customers who appeared slightly drunk and asked if he was okay to leave alone. The man confidently assured him that he would manage just fine. On the other hand, Wu Ju, though nervous, returned to the same neighborhood because he wanted to rescue Buell's puppy, believing it had been locked up there by some soul. As Wu Ju picked up the puppy, Buell noticed some commotion outside her house and came out to see Wu Ju running away with the puppy. She was confused about why Wu Ju was doing this and decided to chase after him. Wu Ju kept glancing back anxiously, fearing that the ghosts might be following him, but of course he was unaware that Buell, whom he couldn't see, was indeed trailing him. Suddenly, Buell's watch activated, signaling that someone's death was imminent. For Grim Reapers, their watches stop working whenever a death is about to occur. At the same time, the same drunk man who had confidently walked out of the restaurant earlier got into his truck. He was heavily intoxicated and fell asleep while driving. Wu Ju was still running with the puppy, unknowingly wandering onto the street. Buell continued chasing him, but as Wu Ju moved further, the truck approached him head-on. This was the moment when Wu Ju's life was about to end. Unable to bear the thought of seeing Wu Ju die, Buell broke the rules and pushed him out of the truck's path, just in time. The truck passed straight through Buell's body before crashing into a wall ahead. Buell was left panicked and unsure of what to do. Not only had she broken the rules by saving Wu Ju, but she also didn't know what would happen to the drunk driver, and Wu Ju lay motionless on the ground. Buell could only watch helplessly, unsure of what this meant for Wu Ju and for herself. Just then, Buell noticed Yoongji arriving in his car to collect Wu Ju's soul. This was Yoongji's assigned task. He excitedly retrieved Wu Ju's soul and placed it in his car, all while enthusiastically praising Wu Ju. Yoongji, driving Wu Ju's soul to the afterlife, couldn't contain his excitement. He confessed he shouldn't be happy about the situation, but he felt incredibly lucky to escort a superstar like Wu Ju. Sitting in the car with Wu Ju's soul, Yoongji gushed about wanting to take a selfie but decided against it since Wu Ju's soul didn't look presentable yet. However, when Wu Ju's soul started acting uneasy and even threw up in the car, Yoongji tolerated it because he still believed he had caught Wu Ju's soul. The next day, chaos erupted at Manager Go's office. He received scolding calls from higher authorities. Because one of their workers mistakenly transported the wrong soul to the afterlife, and another Grim Reaper had interfered by saving a human whose soul was supposed to transition. Furious, Manager Go reprimanded Yoongji, questioning how, despite being a senior, he could transport a soul without verifying its identity. Manager Go accused Yoongji of trying to ruin the South Korean Grim Reaper department, as if he were a North Korean spy. Embarrassed, Yoongji apologized, but Manager Go angrily chased him out of the office. Turning his attention to Buell, who looked terrified, Manager Go calmed himself and invited her to step outside with him. Once outside, he sternly reminded her of all the rules she had broken, failing to transport any soul, saving a human who was meant to die, and causing a chain reaction that endangered others. Buell tried to defend herself, explaining that the drunk man would have died soon anyway. However, Manager Go was resolute and fired her from her job. Heartbroken, Buell returned home and stared at her school uniform, recalling what Manager Go had told her in private after locking all the windows and doors to ensure no one overheard them. He revealed a shocking possibility that Buell could become human again. Understanding how desperate she was to stay with Wu Ju, Manager Go explained that if Buell wore the same clothes, stood at the same spot, and got hit by the car at the same time and day as her original accident, she could regain her human form temporarily. However, there was a condition. Buell could only stay human until she fulfilled the 7 wishes she had written down before dying. Once those wishes were completed, she would revert to being a soul. Additionally, Wu Ju's time of death was still approaching. If Buell could protect him until the first snowfall, even the Grim Reapers would lose interest in him, ensuring his safety. Determined, Buell prepared herself for the task. She recreated the exact scenario of her original accident. At the designated moment, Buell stepped in front of the van. Miraculously, she became visible again. This shocked the assistant in the van, who witnessed her transformation. But Buell was overjoyed as she was human again, and now Wu Ju could see and hear her. Unexpectedly, Wu Ju was sitting in the same van. He stepped out and was astonished to see Buell, but for Buell the scene was identical to what she had witnessed during her first accident. Both were stunned yet connected by the incredible turn of events. Buell's hand now had a mysterious 7-star mark glowing on it. Meanwhile, Manager Gu was casually sipping his tea with a blank stare. looking like someone who had just uncovered the plot twist of his own life. He seemed to have realized that Bile had now become a valid human being. But this all smelled like another one of Manager Gu's secret schemes, the kind he didn't bother sharing with Bile. Cut to the ambulance where Bile was being rushed to the hospital. In her blurry vision, she spots Hyun-soo and Dr. Sori hovering around like extras in a medical drama. Once she gets to the hospital, things get even weirder. The girl whose life Bile had saved earlier? She freaks out as soon as she sees Bile. Apparently, she recognized her and was now behaving like she just ran into a ghost at the ER. When Bile finally regains consciousness, she touches herself to confirm she's real. Surprise, it wasn't all a dream. She could now see herself in the mirror, a luxury she didn't have before. And the best part? She could actually meet Woo-ju, her idol, face to face. She was now ready to practically live every fangirl's fantasy. On the flip side, Hyun-soo wasn't taking things so well. He looked like he had just seen the boogeyman. When Dr. Sori asked him if he knew the mysterious girl, Hyun-soo dodged the question like a pro-politician. But as soon as they entered Bile's hospital ward, their jaws hit the floor as she was gone. Bile ran from the hospital because Woo-ju's death timer had started ticking again. Woo-ju is performing at a concert, completely unaware of the chaos headed his way. Bile finds herself caught in the drama again, and somehow ends up at the concert venue. Just as Woo-ju's timer is about to hit 0, Bile notices a large spotlight about to fall on him. Without hesitation, she rushes onto the stage, shoves him out of harm's way, and saves him. The event organizers are frantic, trying to figure out who this mysterious girl is and how she even made it on stage. Woo-ju, stunned, wonders if his life has turned into a soap opera. Meanwhile, Hyun-soo and Dr. Sori are watching the live broadcast. Manager Gu, in the Grim Reaper's office, calmly informs someone over the phone that Biwal is now destined to cause Woo-ju's death. So there is no need to worry now. Back on stage, Bile notices the falling light and uses her body to shield Woo-ju. Realizing her intention, Woo-ju pulls her aside just in time. The light crashes onto the stage, but no one is harmed, except Bile as one of the stars on her hand vanishes, leaving her with only 6. Being a hero has its cost, and Biwal's cosmic currency is running low. After the concert, Biwal is arrested by the police, who believe she planned the spotlight incident to get Woo-ju's attention. Despite her repeated denials, the police remain unconvinced. Meanwhile, Woo-ju asks his assistant about the girl and how she recovered so quickly. The assistant explained that Bile is probably just a crazy fan who wanted to meet him. He advised Woo-ju to get a girlfriend to keep such fans away and to help him write romantic songs again. At the police station, Bile is repeatedly questioned about her supposed plan, but her claims of innocence are ignored. Just then, Hyun-soo arrives and arranges for her release on bail. She is taken to his house, where his mother is shocked to see her. Hyun-soo's mother asks if Bile is his girlfriend, but Hyun-soo denies it. He explains that Bile is just someone he knows and needs a place to stay for a few days. He suggests that she might have run away from home and could be in some trouble, so helping her is necessary. His mother reluctantly accepts the explanation. Bile was given clothes by Hyun-soo and was asked why she had left the hospital. Bile avoided the question and instead expressed gratitude for the help. When she asked why Hyun-soo was being so kind to her, Hyun-soo explained that she reminded him of someone. Hyun-soo told her to rest and reassured her that she could stay as long as she wanted. The news filled Bile with immense joy. At Woo-ju's house, he struggled to write a song but made no progress. Frustrated, he picked up the Bile's puppy and began playing with it. He wondered aloud if falling in love was a good idea, all the while admiring how adorable the puppy was. The next day, Woo-ju volunteered alongside his haters, including the girl who had written mean comments about him at the bus stop. Woo-ju encouraged her to smile. Meanwhile, Bile also followed Woo-ju closely because she was determined to fulfill her mission to protect him. A group photo was taken with the volunteers, and Bile stood in it, smiling brightly. As Woo-ju left, Bile's watch timer activated once again. She tried to follow him but stumbled and fell. At that moment, Gakshi appeared and Biwal was so happy because she could see her friend. Gakshi helped her up and gave her an idea. Acting on the suggestion, Bile disguised herself as a makeup artist and managed to sneak into Woo-ju's van. While the van moved, Woo-ju's assistant started nodding off. Bile tapped his head, waking him up, but the van began swerving. Woo-ju quickly grabbed the steering wheel and regained control, scolding the assistant for his carelessness. Upon arriving at the studio, Bile had to do Woo-ju's makeup. She didn't know how to put on makeup, but she had to do it. Nervously, she worked on his face. Her touch was gentle but hesitant. She felt very happy as she was touching Woo-ju's face. She finished the task carefully, her fingers lingering as she completed the makeup. The assistant entered the room and froze in fear when he saw Woo-ju's makeup. He was looking like a ghost. Realizing immediately that Bile wasn't the real makeup artist, he reported her. Bile was handed over to the police again. After a brief time in custody, they issued her a warning and released her. After being released from the station, Buell went straight to Woo Ju's home. Gakshi helped Bile unlock Woo Ju's house door. Once inside, Bile flushed all of Woo Ju's sleeping pills down the drain. She stayed in the house and began talking about Woo Ju, her concern for him evident. But Gakshi was less interested in her, and she used lipstick to scribble something on the mirror. Bile scolded her, insisting it wasn't right. Suddenly, the sound of Woo Ju returning home startled her. Panicking, Bile hid under the piano, clutching the puppy tightly. Suspicion gripped Woo Ju as he searched the house, but Bile slipped away undetected. When he entered the washroom, he noticed writing on the mirror in lipstick, "We will protect you and won't let anything happen to you." Alarmed, Woo Ju immediately checked his CCTV footage. He discovered that the same girl had entered his house and taken his puppy. He called his assistant urgently, instructing him to find out her home address so the puppy could be retrieved. Bile returned to Hyun Soo's house, where the little girl was playing with her friends. The moment she saw Bile, the girl froze in fear and asked if Bile had come to take her away. Smiling gently, Bile reassured her, promising that such a thing would never happen. Outside Hyun Soo's house, Woo Ju spotted his puppy playing with the children. He approached them and calmly explained that the puppy belonged to him. Just then, a familiar melody caught his attention. It was the same song he had heard in his house before. The sound led him to Hyun Soo's house, where he entered and discovered that the girl who saved her was singing that very song. The performance deeply moved him. When the song ended, Woo Ju stood outside the room and told Bile that the song was from his first album. He explained that it was a track very few people remembered, making it clear she must be his biggest fan. Bile was stunned to see Woo Ju in Hyun Soo's house and taken aback by his words. The little girl, equally surprised, asked Woo Ju for an autograph. Smiling, he signed for her before she happily left. Woo Ju praised Biwol's voice and for the first time, did not seem angry with her. Instead, he affectionately asked her to return the puppy she had taken from his house. Bile, in response, claimed that it was not her puppy and Woo Ju who had taken the puppy. Woo Ju, with a slightly sarcastic laugh, says that this means the girl has been watching him for a long time. Bile responds that she only wants to save Woo Ju, and that's why she requests him to let her stay with him. Hearing this, Woo Ju asks if she's a fortune teller because he can't understand why he would do that. Suddenly, he recalls his assistant's advice about getting a girlfriend. Woo Ju then moves closer to Bile, sits next to her, and asks if she'd like to go on a date with him. Bile is utterly shocked but happily agrees. At the cafeteria, Gakshi is also thrilled for Bile and tells her how lucky she is to get a chance to go on a date with her idol. However, noticing Biwol's appearance, she remarks that Bile can't go on a date looking like this. She then asks if Bile has money to buy some decent clothes. Bile remembers that before leaving, the old man from the funeral had given her his bank passbook. When Gakshi and Bile check it, they find a huge amount of money in the account. The two then head out for shopping, and after trying on several outfits, Bile falls in love with a beautiful white dress. When she wears it, she looks entirely transformed. Bile starts waiting for Woo Ju, and when he sees her, he is stunned. This girl looked absolutely gorgeous. He quickly asks her to get in the vehicle. Woo Ju asks Bile her name, but instead of giving her real name, she gives the name of the old man from the funeral. Woo Ju finds the name odd but decides to let it go and instead asks where she wants to go. Bile replies that she would like to visit the amusement park. Woo Ju hesitates and nervously asks why she wants to go there when they could visit a much fancier place. But Biwol realizes why Woo Ju is reluctant to go to the amusement park, and she teases him and asks if he's scared. Woo Ju was trying to save face, says he fears no one and agrees to go to the amusement park. At the amusement park, Bile is having the time of her life, but Woo Ju is struggling for his breath because he dislikes rides. Bile, on the other hand, enjoys every ride enthusiastically, and they even take photos together, in which Woo Ju's expressions are priceless. After leaving the park, Woo Ju tries to act all cool again, as if nothing had happened. Woo Ju asks Bile where she wants to go next, and Bile suggests they try the kids' ride so that Woo Ju doesn't get scared. Woo Ju acts as if he doesn't care, but deep down he enjoys the moment. During one of the rides, Bile's hand accidentally brushes against Woo Ju's and she quickly pulls it away. However, Woo Ju places his hand gently on hers and looks at her lovingly. Bile feels as though she is on cloud 9. As their first romantic date comes to an end and it's time to go home, one more star disappears from Buell's hand, leaving only 5 stars. This is because one of her wishes was to go on a date to an amusement park with someone she likes, and this wish has been fulfilled. When they returned home, Woo-ju could now focus on his music because the day had been so memorable. He asks Byle if she would like to go on another date, and Byle, overjoyed, agrees by saying that this time it will be her treat. The next day, when Woo-ju meets Byle, he is shocked to see that she has ordered a large amount of food for him. During the meal, Byle makes a mess while eating, so Woo-ju hands her a tissue to clean her face. Byle was unsure of where to wipe, fumbles. This prompted Woo-ju to clean her face for her. When Woo-ju tries to throw the tissue away, Byle stops him and keeps it in her purse, as it holds sentimental value for her. Later, the two go on another date and visit a place where they can win toys. Byle has her eye on a locket, but Woo-ju struggles to grab it. Meanwhile, Byle's watch suddenly activates, showing the timer of Woo-ju. She then immediately urges Woo-ju to leave. However, Woo-ju stubbornly insists that he will win the locket no matter what. Byle notices the light above Woo-ju that is about to fall and quickly grabs a bunny toy to distract him. She then takes his hand and pulls him away, just as the light crashes to the ground, saving his life once again. Woo-ju looks at the fallen light in shock. Young Ki, who had been watching Woo-ju as part of his assignment, reaches there and decides to keep a close eye on Byle because she is making his job harder. From there, Buell takes Woo-ju to the bus stop. As Woo-ju says goodbye and leaves, Byle feels incredibly happy. After this, Young Ki returns to the office and tells manager Gu to stop Byle because she keeps interfering in his work. Manager Gu assures him not to worry, saying that soon enough, Byle herself will become the cause of Woo-ju's death. Later that night, Byle visits Woo-ju's house for another date. She records a message in the bunny toy, expressing how much she likes him. Sitting by the piano, she begins to play a tune that Woo-ju finds enchanting. Woo-ju learns the tune from her, and the two play the piano together. Once again, Woo-ju's hand brushes against Byle's, creating a romantic atmosphere between them. Byle feels nervous and tells Woo-ju that she needs to go home and starts preparing to leave. Just then, Gaksha begins switching the lights on and off. Because she wanted to make their moment memorable. But this frightens Woo-ju since he is terrified of the dark. In his fear, he asks Buell to stay with him. Byle agrees and tells him that whenever he feels scared of the dark, he should think of his mom, as it would help him overcome his fear. Woo-ju finds her advice comforting and agrees to try it. The next morning, when Woo-ju wakes up and sees Byle playing with a puppy outside his house, he feels an overwhelming sense of joy. He steps outside and suddenly hugs her, catching Buell off guard. Though shocked at first, Byle enjoys the moment. Slowly, Woo-ju also begins to develop genuine feelings for Byle. Finally, Woo-ju completes the recording of his song. As he records, he reflects on all the memories he shared with Byle, which inspires him to create a heartfelt track. Buell watches him from outside the studio and feels incredibly proud of him. After the recording, Woo-ju's manager praises him, but his assistant casually remarks that it seems the fake relationship idea worked. Confused, the manager asks for clarification. Then the assistant explains that Woo-ju started fake dating a girl just to get inspiration for his song. Byle, who had just arrived and overheard the conversation from outside, is heartbroken. The assistant continues, mentioning that Woo-ju pretended to date the girl just so he could write a love song. Jolene adds that Woo-ju's standards must be really low to date such a girl, and it would have been better if he dated her instead. Before Woo-ju can say anything, the coffee cup in Buell's hand falls to the ground, and she runs away in tears. Seeing this, Woo-ju tries to go after her, but his manager stops him, saying there's no need to chase after someone they don't need anymore. Angered and hurt, Woo-ju silently deletes the recording of his song and walks away. This act leaves the manager and Jolene frustrated. Woo-ju rushes to find Buell and spots her at the bus stop. He sits beside her and admits that it's true he initially approached her to write his song. However, he confesses that things have changed now and he genuinely likes her. As he leans in to kiss her, Byle doesn't stop him. But suddenly she remembers that her first kiss is one of her 7 wishes. If she allows Woo-ju to kiss her, another star will disappear from her hand. Panicking at the thought, Byle abruptly leaves Woo-ju, boards the bus and departs, leaving Woo-ju behind, confused and heartbroken. Returning home, Woo-ju kept replaying the moment in his mind, regretting that he had rushed the first kiss. He believed that Byle had run away because she was scared, but he was certain that Byle liked him too. Trying to reassure himself, Woo-ju pressed the button on the bunny toy Buell had gifted him. To his surprise, Byle's voice played, confessing how much she liked him. Suddenly, Woo-ju remembered his old bunny toy, which had a similar voice recording from his very first fan. Along with the toy, the fan had left him a letter. Intrigued, Woo-ju asked his assistant to track down the girl who had given him that letter. His assistant was surprised that Woo-ju still remembered his first fan and promised to help find her. After some time, Byle nervously entered the recording studio, where Woo-ju had brought her to record the same song he had deleted earlier, this time in her voice. Bile was extremely anxious and no one in the studio believed she could do it. But Wu Ju had complete faith in her. As Bile began singing, everyone was stunned by her voice as it was beautiful and soulful. They couldn't stop praising her. Bile poured her emotions into the song, recalling all her memories with Wu Ju. However, while singing, she was suddenly reminded of the day of her accident and saw Hyun Soo's face in her mind. She realized that her accident had not been a coincidence, but Hyun Soo had caused it. The image of Wu Ju she had seen that day was just an illusion. Later, at home, Buil shared her feelings with Gak Shi. She was deeply upset, saying that she spent all her time chasing Wu Ju. But she didn't even remember her own identity, her name, or her life before meeting him. Hyun Soo visited the hospital, as he often did, to care for a certain woman. It was evident that he had been looking after her for years and frequently spent time there. Wu Ju, longing to talk to Biol, sent her a text, but Biwal was so overwhelmed and confused that she couldn't respond properly. Wu Ju felt like she was ignoring her, so he told her to return the phone he had gifted her if she didn't want to talk to him anymore. This cell phone was actually gifted by Wu Ju. Biol is now feeling even more distressed and replied that she would return the phone to his assistant the next day. Wu Ju, hurt by Buell's behavior, started believing that she had lost interest in him. When Hyun Soo came, Buell confronted him directly, demanding to know why he had caused her accident. She told him that he seemed like a kind person who always helped others, so there had to be another reason behind his actions. Biol also accused Hyun Soo of recognizing her and bringing her to his home after the accident. She asked him about her family and whether he knew anything about her past. Overwhelmed with emotions, Hyun Soo hugged her and promised to tell her everything the next day at the park, including her mother. This calmed Buell down, but at that moment, Wu Ju arrived outside Hyun Soo's house and saw the two hugging. The very moment Wu Hu also came to see Biwal, and when he saw her hugging some man, he felt jealous. Misunderstanding the situation, Wu Ju assumed that Biwal had feelings for Hyun Soo. Distraught, he returned home, unable to sleep as thoughts of Biwal consumed him. He went to take his sleeping pills but found the bottle empty. Before Biwal entered his life, Wu Ju had been deeply unhappy, even contemplating extreme steps. However, Biwal's presence had brought light and happiness into his life. Now, with her seemingly gone, his world felt dark once again. The next day, Wu Ju attended a radio talk show where their romantic song with Biwal had become a massive hit and gone viral. Wu Ju was sitting inside the studio, but he saw Biwal. He ran toward her. But Biwal had already left after returning his phone to his assistant. When Wu Ju received the phone, he couldn't resist reading Biwal and Hyun Soo's chat messages. He discovered that Hyun Soo had asked Biwal to meet him at the park, providing the time and location. Furious, Wu Ju thought to himself that Biwal was far more cunning than he had anticipated. After the studio, Wu Ju visited the hospital to request sleeping pills from Dr. Sori, but she refused. Suspicious of his intentions, she asked if he was truly dating the girl who had saved him from the accident that day. He, who constantly denies liking her but can't help smiling whenever she comes up in conversation, is a classic case. Sori teases him, saying he must like that girl because ever since she entered his life, he's been smiling more and looking genuinely happy. Meanwhile, Wu Ju is at the park waiting for Hyun Soo, but even after waiting forever, he doesn't show up. At that moment, Biol notices a mother and her child in the park, and memories of her mom flood back, the day of her mom's accident, when her mom had asked her to fix her shoes, but Biwal had brushed it off. Sitting there in the rain, drenched, she remembers her mom and starts crying. In the hospital, the emergency ward is chaotic, with accident cases pouring in one after another. When Dr. Sori sees the shoes of an EMT officer, she freaks out, thinking it's Hyun Soo. Tears start rolling down her face. But then she spots Hyun Soo bringing another injured officer into the ward, and relief washes over her. Her joy is palpable because deep down she has feelings for him too. Wu Ju was sitting in his van and looking at Buell's photo, realizes that he can't live without her anymore. So he abruptly stops the van and rushes to her house. While waiting for her, he plays with some kids and even wins a locket that Buell had wanted. But when Buell doesn't show up, he figures she must be at the park. On the way, when he finds her, Wu Ju puts the locket around her neck. However, people nearby start recognizing him, so he quickly takes Buell away. In a private moment, Wu Ju confesses his feelings for her and seals it with a kiss. This time, Buell doesn't resist. With this, Buell loses yet another star, leaving her with only 4 stars. Outside the hospital, Sori confesses her feelings to Hyun Soo. But Hyun Soo, riddled with guilt, tells her he is not a good person and doesn't deserve anyone's love, especially after the accident with Buell. He feels he doesn't deserve happiness. Sori, however, assures him that he's the best person she knows, someone who always helps others. But Wu and Buell spend a lovely day at the beach. Biol can't believe Wu Ju is there with her. Woo Ju opens up about his father. He shared how his dad never spent time with him and he was always buried in work. As a result, he grew distant from his father. But now he understands that his dad worked hard to keep the family happy. Unfortunately, even though Woo Ju wants to reconnect, he hasn't been able to. So in classic Bile style, she takes Woo Ju's phone and texts his dad, "I love you," shocked. Woo Ju is left speechless, wondering what on earth she just did. But moments later, his dad replies, "I love you too," my son, leaving Woo Ju overjoyed. His father, who hadn't expressed anything like this for years, is equally thrilled to receive such a message. As it turns out, Woo Ju's father is none other than the owner of the restaurant who kept insisting Woo Ju's manager. It also turns out Gakshi had made Woo Ju's assistant her online boyfriend. She'd been chatting with him online but never met him in person. Surprisingly, her dream of going on a date finally comes true. Online romance level unlocked. In the hospital, the room of the lady Hein Su had been taken care of for so many days is being cleared out. When Dr. Sori asks the nurse why, she learns that the lady doesn't have much time left. While checking the woman's belongings, Sori finds a photo of Bile and pieces the puzzle together. The woman Hyun Su had been so dedicated to was none other than Bile's mom. Shocked, she immediately calls Woo Ju to tell him the news. Woo Ju arrives at the hospital with Bile, who, upon seeing her mom, is flooded with memories. The first thing she does is fix her shoes, just like her mom always told her to. Then, standing by her mom's bed, Bile breaks down, apologizing for leaving and blaming herself for her mom's condition. Through her tears, she tells her mom how much she misses her and says, "I love you," her mom, though weak, hears everything, and tears roll down her face too. In a heart-wrenching moment, Bile's mom, now becoming a soul, gently touches Buell's face and says, "I love you too," before peacefully passing away. Bile is utterly shattered. As she steps out of the room, Hyun Su drops to his knees and he begins begging for forgiveness, but Bile, overwhelmed by grief, walks away without saying a word. Woo Ju and Sori witness the scene from a distance. Later, at the park, Woo Ju finds Bile utterly broken and comforts her. But as they share this vulnerable moment, someone snaps a photo, and the next day, it's all over the news that Woo Ju is dating someone. His manager is furious and warns him to break things off immediately or risk ruining his public image. The trials of love in the age of paparazzi and public opinion. But Woo Ju outright refuses to leave Bile alone, no matter what. The manager, however, informs him that even if he's willing to fight for her, Bile has already decided to end things and doesn't want to date him anymore. Hearing this, Woo Ju runs to Bile's room, only to find it empty as she's left, distancing herself from him because she blames herself for the chaos in his life. Woo Ju visits his father's restaurant. When the news shows fans angrily criticizing him for dating someone, his father turns off the TV and advises him to ignore all the noise. His dad tells him never to leave the person he loves, no matter the circumstances. He even expresses a desire to meet Bile. Woo Ju, with renewed determination, promises to bring Bile home someday, mentioning that she loves noodles, which makes his father smile. When Gakshi knows all this, she tells Bile that her time on Earth is over, as her dream of going on a date has been fulfilled. Before leaving for the afterlife, she advises Bile to return to Woo Ju, reminding her of how much he's done for her and how he's standing against the whole world for her. Finally convinced, Bile agrees. She bids an emotional goodbye to Gakshi and heads to Woo Ju's concert. But when Bile arrives at the venue, she learns the concert has been cancelled. Woo Ju, devastated by the backlash, is sitting in his darkened home, feeling rejected because his fans no longer want to hear him sing. At that moment, his assistant calls him, and Woo Ju rushes to the place where Bile used to stay. There, he's overwhelmed to find a heartwarming surprise. Everything has been decorated for him, and his true fans are gathered, cheering him on. It's a moment of pure joy, as this was all orchestrated by Bile. Buoyed by the support, Woo Ju takes the stage and performs with all his heart, with everyone cheering for him. But amidst the celebration, Bile spots Young Ki in the crowd, the man who had been sent to take Woo Ju away. Fear grips her as she realizes the danger hasn't passed. Suddenly, a student approaches Bile aggressively, upset that Woo Ju dared to date anyone. Just as the student is about to attack her, Woo Ju steps in and shields her, getting injured in the process, and immediately the snow also begins. At that moment, the manager's earlier warning echoes loud and clear as Bile's presence might truly cost Woo Ju his life. In the hospital, doctors and nurses desperately try to save Woo Ju, but despite their efforts, he doesn't make it. Bile, overwhelmed by grief, climbs to the roof. As she stands there ready to end it all, Young Ki arrives. In a moment of vulnerability, Bile pleads with him for help, asking him to remember how she once saved his daughter's life. This was the key, as Young Ki's daughter was the little girl Bile had helped. On that fateful day, young Ki had learned the truth about Buell's connection to his daughter and everything that had happened. Bio also tells young Ki to pass on a message to manager Go, that she knows everything now and has forgiven him. But young Ki is confused, unsure of what Bio is referring to. The truth is, when Bio had been living at Hyun Soo's house, she had seen a picture of manager Go with Hyun Soo. Manager Go was actually Hyun Soo's father. Hyun Soo had been burdened with all the responsibility after his father left. He worked tirelessly. On the day of the accident, Hyun Soo had fallen asleep in his van and his father had been there too. When they noticed Hyun Soo was drifting off, Manager Go swerved the truck, causing it to crash into Bio. If not for Manager Go's actions, Bio wouldn't have transformed into a soul. It was all because of his regret for his mistakes that he had kept silent and forgiven her for every time when she made mistakes as Grim Reaper. Now, knowing all the truth, Manager Go calls the above authority, demanding that Woo-ju and Bio be given their lives back. If they aren't, he threatens to expose all the mistakes of the department, which would bring ruin and disgrace to them all. Finally, this plea is heard and Woo-ju is brought back to life. The next day, when Woo-ju regains consciousness, Bio is there to hold him tight. Hyun Soo is overjoyed and even asks Sori out on a date now that Bio has forgiven him. A few days later in the same house, Woo-ju plays the piano and sings a song for Bio. As he reads her a letter, Bio realizes it's the very letter she had written herself. Hearing the cheesy lines, she tells Woo-ju to stop, but they both enjoy their life together, cherishing each moment. Woo-ju kisses Bio, acknowledging that his first fan was none other than her. She had always been the most special to him, and that's why he kept her bunny with him. Now, realizing that his first fan was also his true love, Woo-ju proposes to Bio. Finally, the two marry and they live a blissful life. Years later, when their dog passes away, Bio is deeply saddened. But after some years on the beach with their son and husband, Bio is living the life of her dreams. To capture this perfect moment forever, she took a photo, and they lived happily ever after.